The winter of 1974 brought more than just bitter cold to the northeastern United States. Across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, a pattern emerged that would chill investigators to their core. It began with a knock, always polite, always professional. A well-dressed man, accompanied by his young son, offering door-to-door shoe-fitting services. They targeted affluent suburbs, where manicured lawns and picture windows masked a false sense of security. The father, with his precise manner and sophisticated sales pitch, seemed trustworthy. The son, barely a teenager, disarmed any lingering suspicions. Who would fear a child? But behind closed doors, these house calls transformed into nightmares. 6 murders, dozens of assaults, and a trail of traumatized survivors would later reveal the true nature of their visits. Local papers dubbed him the shoe salesman killer, but that simple moniker barely scratched the surface of Joseph Kallinger's complex reign of terror. This isn't just another entry in America's dark criminal archive. This is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the power of psychological manipulation, and the thin line between victim and perpetrator. Through the lens of Joseph Kallinger and his 13-year-old son Michael, we witness how trauma can echo through generations, creating monsters from the most innocent beginnings. Philadelphia, 1936. In a Catholic orphanage where gray walls stretched toward heaven and children's prayers echoed through cold corridors, a baby was abandoned. Joseph Kallinger entered the world unwanted, unnamed, and unknown. His first 3 years were spent in institutional care before Stephen and Anna Kallinger adopted him, promising him a home, but delivering him into another kind of hell. The Kallinger household operated on strict rules and savage punishment. Their basement became Joseph's education in cruelty. Stephen Kallinger, a German immigrant with old-world disciplinary beliefs, introduced young Joseph to a methodology of torture that would later inform his own crimes. The boy was hung by his feet until blood vessels burst in his eyes. Chains became familiar friends against his skin. Days in darkness stretched into weeks, punctuated only by Anna's religious lectures about sin and damnation. In that basement, young Joseph learned to dissociate from pain, developing a complex relationship with suffering that would later define his adult life. He began having visions, or so he claimed, of angels speaking to him through the darkness. These divine messengers, he said, taught him about power, control, and a twisted version of justice. By his teenage years, Joseph had developed an obsession with shoes and feet, perhaps seeking control over the very appendages that had once dangled him in torment. He showed early signs of both brilliance and madness, teaching himself cobbling while simultaneously developing elaborate paranoid delusions. Marriage came early, as did children. Joseph opened a shoe repair business in Philadelphia, presenting a facade of normalcy to the world. But behind closed doors, the cycle of abuse continued with frightening innovation. His children became test subjects for his growing psychosis. He burned them with matches, locked them in closets, and forced them to eat excrement, all while maintaining a public persona of strict but loving father. Michael, his third son, became special in Joseph's disturbed worldview. Born in 1960, Michael showed early signs of compliance and sensitivity that Joseph recognized as useful. The boy became both his father's primary victim and his chosen disciple. Through systematic abuse and calculated manipulation, Joseph molded Michael into something unprecedented, a child who could seamlessly switch between victim and perpetrator. Joseph convinced Michael that they shared a divine mission. Through a combination of physical torture, psychological manipulation, and religious indoctrination, he created a horrifying bond with his son. By age 13, Michael had been so thoroughly programmed that he couldn't distinguish reality from his father's delusions. Together, they began having shared visions, religious experiences that Joseph used to justify their later crimes. The transformation was complete. A victim of institutionalization and abuse had become an abuser, and in turn, had created his own accomplice from his own flesh and blood. The stage was set for a reign of terror that would span 3 states and leave an indelible mark on American criminal history. January 1974 marked the beginning of a methodical campaign of terror. Joseph and Michael's operation was far more sophisticated than simple home invasions. They developed a system that combined Joseph's knowledge of suburban sales techniques with a predator's instinct for vulnerability. Their method began with reconnaissance. During daylight hours, they would observe neighborhoods, noting houses with signs of children, bicycles in driveways, swing sets in backyards. Joseph understood that homes with children meant mothers would likely be present during the day. He kept detailed notes in a leather-bound journal, marking potential targets with disturbing precision. The sales pitch was practiced to perfection. Joseph would present himself as Dr. Joseph Kallinger, a podiatry specialist conducting a survey for a new line of orthopedic shoes. His professional demeanor, combined with Michael's presence, created a disarming image of father-son entrepreneurship. Who could suspect a man who brought his child to work? Once inside, the scenario would unfold with horrifying efficiency. Joseph would produce a leather bag containing legitimate foot-measuring tools alongside ropes and knives. The victims, usually women and children, would be bound and subjected to hours of torture. Joseph would often lecture his captives about divine justice while Michael stood guard, sometimes participating in the violence under his father's direction. The Romaine family in Westfield, New Jersey, became their first known murder victims. Maria Romaine, 31, was home with her 3 children when she admitted the Kallingers. 7 hours later, police discovered a scene that would haunt them for years. The details of what transpired in that house would later be described by surviving victims from other attacks, painting a picture of ritualistic torture combined with religious fervor. In Maryland, the Watson family survived an encounter that provided crucial details about the killer's methodology. 8-year-old Tommy Watson later described how the younger Kallinger had seemed almost apologetic while helping to tie up his family, whispering that "Dad says this is God's work." The murder of nurse Suzanne Steiger in Philadelphia represented an escalation in violence. Found in her bathtub, she had been subjected to elaborate torture that showed signs of both medical knowledge and deranged religious symbolism. Joseph had begun incorporating elements from his visions into the crimes, leaving biblical passages written in blood at crime scenes. As winter deepened, so did the horror. The Kallingers grew bolder, sometimes holding multiple families captive in their own homes for entire days. Joseph would perform what he called ceremonies of purification, forcing parents to witness their children's torture while reciting passages from his personal religious manuscripts. Throughout these events, Michael's role became increasingly active. Survivors reported the boy's transformation during attacks, from a seemingly normal teenager to a cold-eyed participant in his father's madness. Some victims noted moments when Michael appeared to struggle internally with his actions, only to be brought back under his father's control with a few whispered words. Detective James Murphy of the Philadelphia PD first noticed the pattern in late January 1974. 3 seemingly unrelated home invasions shared bizarre details: a professional shoe salesman, a young assistant, religious proclamations during the attacks. But jurisdictional boundaries kept the full picture fragmented across 3 states. The investigation's breakthrough came from an unlikely source: a shoe store owner in Camden who recognized Joseph's technique for measuring feet as outdated by decades. This detail led investigators to older business records, revealing Kallinger's history as a cobbler and his previous arrests for child abuse. The task force assembled in February faced a unique challenge. The crime showed both meticulous planning and elements of complete psychosis. Profilers were particularly troubled by the role of Michael, whose presence at the crimes challenged existing theories about family unit killers. Evidence began mounting: foot-measuring tools left at crime scenes bearing microscopic leather traces from multiple victims, Bible pages with handwritten annotations matching Joseph's known writing, and most disturbingly, a journal recovered from a dumpster containing detailed surveillance notes on dozens of potential targets. Survivors' testimonies painted an increasingly complex picture. Some described Joseph as coldly methodical, while others recalled him ranting about angels and divine missions. Michael was variously described as blank-faced, crying silently, or mechanical in his movements. The boy's dual nature particularly disturbed child psychologists consulting on the case. The end began with a mistake. On January 17, 1974, Joseph broke his own methodical pattern. In a small motel outside Buffalo, New York, he left behind a blood-stained shoe-fitting kit after a failed attack. The victim, though severely injured, survived and provided police with crucial details about the father-son duo's appearance and their distinct sales pitch. The weather had turned brutal that week, with a snowstorm battering the Northeast. Joseph and Michael, now fugitives, sought refuge in a series of increasingly seedy motels. Their last known attack occurred at the Valley Forge Motel in Pennsylvania, a desperate, frenzied assault that left 2 maids badly wounded and a Bible studded with bloody fingerprints. Detective Murphy's task force had been monitoring shoe stores and leather supply shops across 3 states. On January 19th, a clerk at Morton's Leather Goods in Baltimore reported selling specialized cobbling tools to a man matching Joseph's description. The customer had a teenage boy with him and paid in blood-stained cash. The net tightened. Police bulletins went out to every motel within a 100-mile radius. The description was specific: a well-dressed man in his 40s traveling with a young teen boy, carrying leather repair equipment and religious texts. They would likely request a room with 2 single beds and pay in cash. On January 23rd, at 3:47 a.m., night clerk Thomas Wheeler at the Continental Motel in Springdale recognized his guests from the police bulletin. Room 242 had been rented to a father and son 2 days earlier. Wheeler noted they only left their room at night and had requested extra blankets despite the working heater. The raid was coordinated across multiple departments. SWAT teams positioned themselves around the motel as a snowstorm provided cover. At 5:15 a.m., just before dawn, they breached the room. Joseph was found kneeling in prayer, surrounded by newspaper clippings of his crimes. Michael sat cross-legged on his bed, methodically cleaning their collection of leather working tools. The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Joseph surrendered without resistance, claiming the angels had told him his mission was complete. Michael, however, became hysterical, screaming about unfinished divine work. The officers present would later describe the boy's eyes as switching between terror and vacancy. The trial of Joseph and Michael Kallinger began in October 1974. The courthouse in Philadelphia became a circus of media attention, psychiatric experts, and true crime enthusiasts. Joseph's behavior in court oscillated between complete lucidity and apparent psychotic episodes. He would quote obscure religious texts one moment and provide detailed descriptions of his crimes the next. Michael's case presented the justice system with a unique challenge. At 13, he was one of the youngest accomplices in a serial murder case. Psychiatric evaluations revealed the extent of his father's manipulation. Years of systematic abuse, brainwashing, and torture had effectively created a psychological puppet. The evidence was overwhelming. Police had recovered Joseph's journals, detailing both past crimes and planned future attacks. The leather bag contained tools with DNA from multiple victims. Most damning were the photographs. Joseph had documented their crimes in detailed Polaroids, creating what he called a testament to divine justice. Joseph was found guilty on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent his remaining years in a psychiatric facility, where he continued to claim divine guidance and wrote extensive manifestos about his mission. He died in 1996, having never expressed remorse. Michael's fate proved more complex. After extensive psychiatric evaluation, he was committed to a juvenile facility for rehabilitation. His recovery process revealed the depths of his father's conditioning. It took years before he could sleep without reciting his father's prayers or eat without performing specific rituals. The story of Joseph and Michael Kallinger forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about cycles of abuse and the thin line between victim and perpetrator. While Joseph's acts were monstrous, Michael's role presents a more complex moral puzzle that continues to challenge criminologists and psychologists today. At just 13 years old when arrested, Michael was both accomplice and victim. Shaped by years of systematic abuse and indoctrination, was he ever truly given a chance at normalcy? His case raises difficult questions about responsibility, rehabilitation, and the power of psychological manipulation. Thinking Face, what do you think about Michael's role in these events? Was he a willing participant or a victim of circumstance? At what point does a child's manipulation become their responsibility? Could earlier intervention have broken this cycle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective on Michael's case could help shed light on similar cases of family unit criminals and parent-child manipulation. If this dark chapter of criminal history has captured your attention, don't miss our upcoming episodes exploring other cases of generational trauma and family crimes. Subscribe to join our community of true crime analysts and receive notifications about new investigations. Remember, understanding these dark chapters of history isn't about sensationalizing tragedy. It's about learning to recognize the warning signs and prevent future cycles of abuse.